500 weary men moved along slowly through the double lines of guards and two massive wooden gates with heavy iron hinges. Bolts swung open as they stood there and passed through the space. They were in Andersonville.
The largest and most famous of 150 military prisons of the Civil War, Camp Sumter, commonly known as Andersonville, was the deadliest landscape of the Civil War. Of the 45,000 Union soldiers imprisoned here, nearly 13,000 died. The National Prisoner of War Museum, Andersonville National Cemetery, and the site of historic Camp Sumter Civil War Prison. Andersonville National Historic Site is the only unit of the National Park System to serve as a memorial to all American prisoners of the war, and admission to the park is free.
It's very easy to see where there's pockets of flowers blooming now, how they might have once been swampy grasslands or even just swampy muddy lands where people were forced to live. The trail follows in footsteps of newly arriving prisoners and captured Union soldiers, marched from the village railroad station past this spot uphill to the north gate. After the prisoners passed through the outer door, it was barred behind them, and then the inner gate swung open to the prison yard. This is the stockade. So this is where the soldiers were, and this is the soldiers' camp. And then inside of these gates, this is where the prisoners were.
Basically, the soldiers would have the good water, and the
prisoners would have the really gross water. And they had no way of getting out, so if they wanted to drink water, that's what they drank.
One river was used for both the prisoners as well as the soldiers, and the soldiers, they used the water first. The top half was used for drinking water, the middle was for washing clothes, and then the end was for using the bathroom in, and the water would then flow into the prisoners of war, where they would drink the water. They would wash their clothes, and they would use the bathroom. So living conditions were horrible, just very horrible conditions for basic needs like water.
So the soldiers would walk the prisoners up about 500 at a time, and they would go in through this area here. They were known as fresh fish, and they had no idea what they were in for once they got through those doors. When the inner gates swung open, new prisoners had their first vision of life inside. The noise, the stench, the crowd of emaciated men desperate for news must have been overwhelming. New arrivals were known as fresh fish, and anything of value, money, buttons, clothing, might be conned or stolen from them the second they got in. Even worse was the sight of other prisoners. In those skeleton forms and lifeless eyes, new prisoners could foresee their own fate. Today, if you were to glance through these doors, it's almost a beautiful vision. You've got rolling green hills, flowers, blue skies. It's actually kind of idyllic with a running stream even. But years ago, this was actually known as the world of hell and the world of lost spirits. This is where the post commandment and prison commanders were. This is where they were stationed to live. It's right across from where the POV were. You can see a little bit more how their guns are positioned. You have a little bit of an elevated field directed right at the prison camp. They had shortages of supply, and they were sort of forced into an area where they couldn't really control the number of people that were coming in. So they were in a really tight position trying to control the food, all the shortages, and the number of people that were here. There were a lot of people that were here. They were responsible for operating a prison camp under conditions that they could hardly control themselves. So before the erosion rounded the walls, these were angled to give defenders overlapping fields of fire. "30,000 human beings within the area. The din of all those voices, groans from the hospital, shouts of the guards, the smell of the dirty clothes and the dead bodies. The landscape of the quiet grass today is nothing like Andersonville was. And the prison commandment, they even didn't have the luxury of enjoying this beautiful view. Out here on the field, you really get a grasp of how large this area was. It was only about 16.5 acres wide, and the whole area swept through. There's hills and there's valleys where the water was, and then it swept back up. So coming out here and doing the loop, you really get a feel for what it was like. 16.5 acres. They've got the blockade posts, the stockade posts out so that you can see them, but honestly, imagining all the people that were out here, there's this not a very large space for the amount of people that were imprisoned here. And if you could imagine the dirty stench, I mean, these people were drinking from one end of the water, bathing in another end, and then using the other end for the bathroom. And that flow of water was the same up at the commander's post. They were doing the same up in their water before that water flowed down into the prisoners' camp. So very, very dirty water, bad conditions, and there wasn't a lot of supplies. So, even the commander, they were dealing with poor conditions, trying to get things, dealing with the number of people that they had and the shortages of supplies. Death, tons of bodies that were dying and decaying, so you had that smell, dirty clothes, dirty people, dirty everything. And then you're in the mud. I mean, the grass that is behind me is not what was there. I mean, when you have a field and you put the cows out to pasture, the cows eventually they eat the grass and they stomp on the grass and it becomes mud if it's overused. Well, imagine having so many people within the 16 acres walking through. They're living, they're breathing, that is their life. They've set up a kind of a mock town center, which is not a town center. And it's not the best living situation at all. This is a place where people came to die. That way is the full 16 acres. You can see the end here, and you can see where the gates were, where it started. It encompassed all the way out through there. We're talking 16 acres. You can see the tiny little wood at the very end, right through there. You can see the end. So from there to here, over and down, imagine the number of people that were congested in this amount of space. The prison itself was basically designed for death. So sensory boxes or pigeon roosts were mounted every 100 feet along the top of the stockade, and guards had orders to shoot any prisoners who crossed the deadline. So every 100 feet you'd see these all along through the walls, and this is what they used for protection. They would shoot anyone who tried to get over the blockade. The guards were mostly old men and young boys from Georgia. They're reluctant witnesses to the misery of Andersonville. So the guards that were up in these pigeon roosts were older men or local Georgia young men, and they were sort of forced to watch the mass of death down below them. Sometimes locals would come to gawk at the prisoners, but mostly it was just very sad. The outer row of white posts marked the perimeter of the stockade, and the inner posts marked the deadline. The area between was a no man's land. If prisoners crossed the deadline, guards in the sentry boxes had orders to shoot them. The stockade is an accurate reconstruction, and archaeologists excavated stumps here to show that the size and spacing of the stockade logs. They were able to map the location of each stockade post from the change in soil produced by the rotting wood. This photograph shows the inner and middle stockade in 1867. Father Peter Willen, an Irish-born Catholic priest from Savannah, arrived in Andersonville to minister to the sick and dying. While other priests visited for brief periods, he remained for nearly 4 months during the hottest season and the time of the highest mortality. At the end of his stay, Willen brought money to purchase 10,000 pounds of wheat flour baked into bread and distributed to the prison hospital. This food became known as Whelan's bread, and it lasted for several months and probably saved many lives. So there were escape tunnels. The ground at this end of the prison is pocketed with deep holes, either tunnels or wells. Because of the overcrowding, it kind of disguised the digging that was going on, and you can see little pockets like this where people had tried to escape. Some tunnels emerged beyond the stockade walls, but nearly all who tunneled free were recaptured. So most of Anderson's approximately 300 escapees that were successful eluded guards while on work details outside of the stockade and not from the tunnels. So the ground at this end of the prison is pocketed with deep holes, either from tunnels or wells. And the overcrowding that was happening inside of the prison disguised all the digging. Beneath the sea of tattered shelters, prisoners could work undetected with mass plates, spoons, and canteen halves. And it's tempting to call every excavation an escape tunnel, but many have been just wells, since there was a natural water source here. With the camp stream lethally polluted, the search for fresh water was always as urgent as the need to escape. I can only imagine that some of these trees were here much smaller at that time, and there's really only about 6 or 7 trees here that stand, so not a lot of shade in the mass sunshine, and Georgia gets hot in the summer. It gets sweltering hot. And then imagine all the people, all confined, all on top of each other. This monument was erected by the state of Wisconsin in grateful remembrance to her sons who suffered and died in Anderson. Prisoners tended to form groups by state or region just to sustain morale. And looking for other monuments on the prison site, they're all throughout the National Cemetery, where so little historic evidence even remains. Symbols of commemoration have become an important part of Anderson's physical and emotional landscape. Cemetery began as a burial place for nearly 12,920 Union soldiers who died in the prison camp. Now, the orderly rows and peaceful setting contrast with the misery and disease within the stockade. When Andersonville, the National Cemetery, was established in July 26, 1865, it became open to veterans of all later wars and remains an active cemetery.
This national park does an exceptional job at the Junior Rangers program, and they really get the younger generation involved, pretending or enacting that they are a prisoner of war and imagining what their life would have been like. It's a great Junior Rangers program, and we've walked through many national park programs, but this is a really good national program for Junior Rangers.
Rows and rows and rows and rows and rows and rows and rows, and this just goes on and on and on and on and on.
You know, can you read the sign there, Kiara? It says, with and malice towards none. It means giving to everybody and not harming anybody. And you know, you have to take it to mind to think about everything that happened in the past and everything that we have right now, and just be appreciative of the United States as it is. You make a wish? They are? People made a wish? Oh. One wish. Good health and world peace and lots of love. That's really sweet of you, Carolina. There is hope yet in this world.
This is an extremely informative as well as generous Junior Ranger program. They gave out pencils, they gave out rulers, they gave out badges that were both a hard badge to pin on as well as a regular badge. So this is a very generous Junior Ranger program and you get a lot out of it. Despite this being a very gruesome history, it was a great park to learn about the history and the kids all were very engaged and had a great time. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and join the adventure by clicking subscribe. We look forward to seeing you on the next adventure.